My husband divorced me by text message and emptied our joint account. He had no idea what was coming next. I F-34 am still numb. I feel like I'm living in a bad movie and I keep waiting to wake up. Yesterday, I was a happily married woman, or so I thought. Today, I'm a discarded wife, staring at a text message that ended my 10-year marriage. My ex-husband, Mark, M37, and I met in college. We were inseparable almost from the start. He was charming, funny, ambitious, and seemingly devoted to me. We got married a year after graduation, and I truly believed we were building a life together, a future. We both worked hard. I'm a teacher, and Mark is in finance. He always made more money than me, but we pooled our resources, shared expenses, and made decisions together. Or so I thought. About 5 years ago, a distant relative of mine, Great Aunt Mildred, passed away. She was a quirky, independent woman who'd never married or had children. She'd always had a soft spot for me, and we'd kept in touch over the years, even though I didn't see her often. To my surprise, she left me a substantial inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a significant amount, close to $500,000, mostly in stocks and bonds. I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do with the money. I talked to a financial advisor, and they suggested I keep it separate, invest it wisely, and let it grow. Here's the thing. I didn't tell Mark. It wasn't that I didn't trust him. I didn't want things to change. I didn't want the money to become a thing between us. I didn't want him to feel like he didn't need to work as hard or that I was somehow superior because I had this inheritance. I know. It sounds stupid now. I should have been honest with him, but at the time, it felt like the right decision. I thought I was protecting our relationship, protecting us. I kept the inheritance a secret. I opened a separate account, in my name only, and I never touched the money. It was my just-in-case fund, my safety. Fast forward to yesterday. I was at school, grading papers, when my phone buzzed. It was a text message from Mark. It read, "I'm leaving you. I'm moving to Miami with Jessica. I've already emptied our joint account. Good luck with your life. Haha." I stared at the message, uncomprehending. I thought it was a joke, a cruel, tasteless joke. I called him. No answer. I texted him. No response. I rushed home, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was empty. Mark's clothes were gone, his toiletries, his laptop. He'd even taken the framed photo of us from our wedding day. I checked our joint bank account online. It was zeroed out. He'd taken everything. Over $80,000, our combined savings. I felt like I was going to throw up. I felt like the world was spinning. I called his best friend, Tom, M37. Tom sounded awkward, uncomfortable. He said he didn't know anything, that he hadn't spoken to Mark in weeks. I knew he was lying. Then I called Mark's mother, Susan, F65. She answered, her voice cold. "He's gone," she said. "He's finally free. He deserves to be happy." "Happy?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What are you talking about?" "He's with Jessica," she said. "She's young, beautiful, and she appreciates him. Unlike you." I hung up. I couldn't breathe. Jessica. I'd met her once, at a work function. She was Mark's new assistant, fresh out of college. Barely 22 years old. I'd thought she was nice, naive. Now I realized she was the reason my life had imploded. I sat there on the floor of our empty living room, staring at the text message, the "ha-ha" at the end. It was like a knife twisting in my gut. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd left me with nothing. He was wrong. I remembered the inheritance, my secret inheritance. I logged into my separate account, the one Mark didn't know existed. The money was still there, untouched, growing steadily. And then I remembered something else, something even more important. When we got married, my father, a lawyer, had insisted on a prenuptial agreement. He'd said it was just a precaution, that he wanted to protect me, just in case. I'd resisted at first. I'd thought it was unromantic, unnecessary. But Mark had agreed easily, saying it didn't matter, that he loved me, not my money. The prenup was simple, straightforward. It stated that any assets we brought into the marriage, or acquired separately during the marriage, would remain separate property in the event of a divorce. The inheritance, the secret account, it was all mine, legally untouchable. I felt a surge of something, not happiness, not yet, but relief and a flicker of anger. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I wasn't going to let him destroy my life and walk away laughing. I called my father. I told him everything. He was furious. He said he'd contact his lawyer immediately and that we'd fight this. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through the motions, trying to make sense of what had happened. I called my best friend, Lisa, F34, and she came over immediately. She held me while I cried, listened to me rant, and helped me make a plan. We packed a bag for me. I couldn't stay in that house, not anymore. I'm staying at Lisa's apartment for now. I'm still in shock. I'm still heartbroken, but I'm also angry, and I'm determined. I'm not going to let Mark win. I'm going to fight back. Eta, for keeping the inheritance a secret? I know I should have told him, but I did it for what I thought were the right reasons. And now, it's the only thing that's saving me. Update 1. It's been a week since my last update and things have moved quickly. My father, true to his word, contacted his lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a formidable divorce attorney with a reputation for being ruthless. Mr. Thompson reviewed the prenup, the evidence of Mark's text message, and the emptied joint account, and he smiled. "This is a slam dunk," he said. "He has no legal leg to stand on." We filed for divorce. The grounds? Abandonment and adultery. We also filed a motion to freeze any assets Mark might still have, preventing him from spending or transferring any more money. And then we served him. Apparently, Mark and Jessica had indeed flown to Miami. They were staying at a fancy hotel, living it up on my money, or rather, what he thought was our money. The process server found them by the pool, sipping cocktails and laughing. The look on Mark's face, when he was served with the divorce papers and the asset freeze order, was priceless. According to the process server, he turned pale, started yelling, and then he started crying. Jessica apparently was furious. She started screaming at Mark, accusing him of lying to her, of ruining her life. It was, I must admit, a small, vindictive part of me felt a surge of satisfaction. But the satisfaction was short-lived. Mark, predictably, lawyered up. He hired a high-powered Miami attorney, and they're fighting back. They're claiming that the prenup is invalid, that I coerced him into signing it, that he didn't understand what he was signing. They're also claiming that the inheritance should be considered marital property, because even though it was in my name only, I had commingled it with our marital assets by paying for groceries with my debit card that was linked to my checking account. I wish I was making this up, but that's their actual argument. It's ridiculous, of course, but it's also stressful and expensive. Mr. Thompson is confident that we'll win, but he's also warned me that it could be a long, drawn-out battle. Mark's lawyer has also contacted me directly, trying to negotiate a settlement. They're offering me a pittance, a fraction of what he stole from the joint account, in exchange for dropping the divorce and agreeing to split the inheritance. I refused, of course. I'm not going to let him bully me. I'm not going to let him get away with this. I've also had to deal with the fallout from Mark's family. His mother, Susan, has been calling me nonstop, leaving hateful messages, accusing me of being a gold digger and a liar. She's even threatened to expose me to our friends and family, claiming that I'm the one who cheated, that I'm the one who destroyed the marriage. I've blocked her number, but she started sending emails filled with the same vitriol and lies. I've forwarded everything to Mr. Thompson. He says it's just more evidence of their harassment and defamation. As for my friends and family, they've been incredibly supportive. Lisa has been my rock, staying with me every night, helping me with the legal paperwork, and just being there for me. My parents are furious with Mark, and they're fully behind me in this fight. Even some of Mark's friends have reached out to me, expressing their shock and disgust at his actions. It seems not everyone is buying his version of events. I'm trying to stay strong, to focus on the future, but it's hard. I still miss Mark, the man I thought he was. I still grieve for the life we had, for the future we planned, but I know I'm doing the right thing. I'm standing up for myself, for my rights, and for my future. I'll update again when there are further developments. The legal battle is just beginning, and I have a feeling it's going to be a long and bumpy ride. Update 2. We had Mark's deposition yesterday. It was revealing and honestly a little bit satisfying. For those who don't know, a deposition is a pretrial procedure where a witness, in this case Mark, is questioned under oath by the opposing lawyer, Mr. Thompson. It's all recorded, and it can be used as evidence in court. Mark, of course, had his Miami lawyer present. He arrived looking smug and confident, dressed in an expensive suit, trying to project an image of success and control. He clearly thought he was going to intimidate me, to make me back down. He was wrong. Mr. Thompson started by asking Mark about the text message, the one where he announced he was leaving me and taking all the money. Mark tried to downplay it, saying it was just a joke, that he hadn't really meant it, that he was just blowing off steam. Mr. Thompson then presented him with the bank records, showing the massive withdrawals he'd made from our joint account. Mark claimed that he was entitled to that money, that it was his money, that he'd earned it. Mr. Thompson pointed out that the account contained both our salaries and that I had contributed significantly to our household expenses. Mark then tried to claim that I had agreed to let him take the money, that we'd had a verbal agreement. Mr. Thompson, of course, had me testify earlier that no such agreement existed. The questioning continued for hours. Mr. Thompson systematically dismantled Mark's lies, exposing his inconsistencies, his contradiction, his outright fabrications. He grilled Mark about Jessica, about their relationship, about how long they'd been seeing each other. Mark initially tried to deny the affair, then claimed it had only started after he'd sent the text message. Mr. Thompson presented him with evidence, text messages, emails, photos, proving that the affair had been going on for months. Mark had even booked a romantic getaway with her weeks before he sent that text to OP. Mark squirmed, stammered, and eventually cracked. He admitted to the affair. He admitted to taking the money. He admitted to lying to me, to his family, to everyone, but he still tried to justify his actions. He claimed that he'd been unhappy in our marriage, that I was cold and distant, that I didn't appreciate him. He said that Jessica made him feel alive again, that she understood him in a way I never could. He even tried to claim that the inheritance should be considered marital property because he had supported me emotionally while I was dealing with my great-aunt's death. It was pathetic. It was infuriating, but it was also revealing. It showed clearly that Mark was a liar, a cheat, and a manipulator, that he was willing to say anything, do anything, to get what he wanted. The deposition ended with Mark looking defeated, deflated. His lawyer looked resigned. Mr. Thompson was pleased. He said that Mark's testimony had significantly weakened his case and that it strengthened ours. He said that we were in a very strong position to win, either in court or through a favorable settlement. I should be feeling elated, triumphant, but honestly, I just feel tired and sad. The deposition confirmed what I already knew, that my marriage was a lie, that the man I loved had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And while it's satisfying to see him exposed, to see his lies unravel, it doesn't bring me joy. It just brings closure. I'm still processing everything. I'm still trying to heal, but I'm also starting to see a future for myself, a future without Mark, without his lies, without his manipulation. I'll update again when there are further developments. The legal battle is still ongoing, but I feel like the tide is turning. Update 3. After Mark's disastrous deposition, we moved on to Jessica's. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would she be defiant, defensive, or remorseful? Would she stick to Mark's lies, or would she tell the truth? She arrived looking surprisingly subdued. Gone was the confident, carefree young woman I'd seen in pictures. She looked nervous, pale, and almost fragile. Mr. Thompson started gently, asking her about her relationship with Mark, about how they'd met, about when their affair began. She answered his questions hesitantly, reluctantly. She confirmed that they'd met at work, that they'd started seeing each other several months before Mark left me, that he'd told her he was unhappy in his marriage. But then, Mr. Thompson started pressing her on the details. He asked her about the romantic getaway, about the expensive gifts Mark had given her, about the promises he'd made. She started to squirm. She started to contradict herself. She started to cry. She admitted that Mark had told her he was going to leave me, that he was going to divorce me, that they were going to start a new life together. But she also admitted that he'd never actually filed for divorce until after he'd left, that he'd kept promising to do it, but he'd always had an excuse. She said that she'd started to get suspicious, that she'd started to doubt his sincerity. Then, Mr. Thompson showed her the text message, the one Mark had sent me, the one where he bragged about emptying our joint account. She stared at the message, her eyes widening in horror. He told me he'd taken his money, she whispered. He said it was his savings from before he met you. Mr. Thompson then showed her the bank records, proving that the account contained both our salaries, that I had contributed significantly to it. She started sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't know, she said, between sobs. I trusted him. I believed him. She then proceeded to tell us everything. She said that Mark had been controlling, manipulative, and emotionally abusive, that he'd isolated her from her friends and family, that he'd made her dependent on him. She said that he'd promised her the world, that he'd painted a picture of a glamorous future together, but that it had all been a lie. She said that after he was served with the divorce papers, he'd become increasingly erratic, increasingly desperate. He'd started drinking heavily. He'd started blaming her for everything. He'd even become physically threatening. She said that she'd realized she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd been blinded by his charm, by his lies. She said that she was leaving him, that she was going back home to her parents, that she was going to start over. She ended by apologizing to me, profusely. She said she was ashamed of her actions, that she'd been naive and foolish, and that she deeply regretted hurting me. It was a stunning turnaround. I didn't know what to believe. Was she genuine? Was she truly remorseful? Or was this just another manipulation tactic, a way to avoid being held accountable for her role in this mess? Mr. Thompson seemed to believe her, at least partially. He said that her testimony could be helpful to our case, that it could further weaken Mark's position, but he also warned me to be cautious. He said that Jessica was still a potential liability, that she could change her story, that she could be unreliable. After the deposition, I went home, and I cried. I cried for the lost marriage, for the betrayal, for the wasted years. But I also cried for Jessica. I felt a strange mix of anger and pity. She was young, naive, and she'd been manipulated by a master manipulator. She'd made a terrible mistake, but she was also a victim, in a way. Then, that night, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I hesitated, but I answered it. "Hello?" I said, my voice cautious. There was a pause. Then, a familiar voice, a voice I hadn't heard in months. "It's Mark," he said. My heart started pounding. I didn't know what to say. I need to talk to you," he said, his voice trembling. "Please, just listen." Update 4. I listened. Mark's voice was a broken whisper of what it used to be. He sounded defeated, lost, and surprisingly, remorseful. This wasn't the arrogant, cocky man who had sent that gloating text message. He started by apologizing. Not a lawyer-crafted, insincere apology, but a raw, emotional outpouring of regret. He said he'd been a fool, a coward, a liar. He said he'd destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to him, and he didn't know why. He said that Jessica had left him, just like she'd said in her deposition. She'd packed her bags and gone back to her parents, leaving him alone in the Miami hotel room, drowning in debt and regret. He said that his lawyer had advised him to fight the divorce, to try to get his hands on the inheritance, but that he'd refused. He said he couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't keep lying, keep fighting. He said he'd realized, too late, that he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd thrown away a loving, supportive marriage for a fleeting infatuation, a fantasy. He said he'd lost everything. His wife, his friends, his reputation, his financial security. He was living in a cheap motel, working odd jobs, trying to make ends meet. He said he'd hit rock bottom. And then he started to cry. He sobbed uncontrollably, apologizing over and over again, begging for my forgiveness. I listened, silently, my own emotions, a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and pity. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't yell at him. I just let him talk. He told me about his childhood, about his dysfunctional family, about his deep-seated insecurities, about his constant need for validation. He said that he'd never felt good enough, that he'd always been chasing something, some elusive sense of happiness, of fulfillment. He said that he'd thought Jessica was the answer, that she was the key to his happiness, but he'd quickly realized that she was just a distraction, a temporary escape from his own demons. He said that he'd realized, too late, that I was the one who truly loved him, who truly understood him, who truly accepted him for who he was. He said that he'd lost the only person who had ever truly cared about him. When he finally stopped crying, I spoke. I told him that I was sorry for his pain, but that I couldn't forgive him. Not yet, maybe not ever. I told him that he'd broken my heart, that he'd betrayed my trust, that he'd destroyed our life together. I told him that he needed to take responsibility for his actions, that he needed to get help, that he needed to rebuild his life on his own. I told him that I was moving on, that I was building a new life for myself, a life without him. And then I hung up. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most liberating. I felt a sense of closure, a sense of peace. I knew that I'd done the right thing. I'd stood up for myself. I'd fought for my future, and I'd won. The legal battle is officially over. Mark signed the divorce papers, agreeing to all my terms. He relinquished all claims to the inheritance, to any shared property, to anything. He's gone, out of my life, forever. I'm focusing on the future now. on my career, on my friends, on my own happiness. I'm still seeing Farah, my girlfriend, and our relationship is stronger than ever. She's been my rock, my support system, my constant source of love and encouragement. I'm also starting to think about the future, about the possibilities. I'm considering going back to school, getting my master's degree, maybe even becoming a principal someday. I'm also planning to use some of the inheritance money to travel, to see the world, to experience new things. I'm finally starting to feel free. Free from the lies, free from the betrayal, free from the pain. I'm starting to feel like myself again. The woman I was before Mark, before the heartbreak, before the drama. It's been a long, difficult journey, but I've made it. I've survived, and I'm stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. This is truly my final update. Thank you from the bottom of my heart to everyone who has followed my story, who has offered support, who has shared their own experiences. You've helped me more than you know. I'm moving on with hope in my heart and a renewed sense of purpose, and I'm finally ready to embrace the future, whatever it may hold. That's all for this story. I'll be back with another one. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It motivates me to create more content like this.